Montana Territory, 1872. The biting wind swept across the plains like a hungry wolf, rattling the weathered boards of Silverstone's only hotel. Grace Patterson stood at the window of her rented room, watching snowflakes dance and disappear into the muddy Main Street below. At 22, she had already learned that beauty faded fast on the frontier, just like trust. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled into a practical bun, though a few stubborn strands had escaped to frame her face. The dark blue calico dress she wore had seen better days, but it was the finest she owned. Grace's fingers found the broken silver chain around her neck, tracing it to where the pendant should have been. Only the clasp and a few links remained. The rest of her mother's necklace, the silver heart pendant with its tiny ruby center, was safely hidden in a false bottom of her traveling trunk. She'd broken it deliberately 3 months ago, the night she fled Pittsburgh with only what she could carry. "No man will ever own my heart," she whispered to the empty room. Not after Jonathan. The memory of her former fiancé's betrayal still burned fresh, reinforcing her conviction that the frontier was a place for survival, not romance. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially not with winter bearing down and her teaching position still uncertain. Grace had come to Montana Territory to escape, to rebuild. She would be self-sufficient, answerable to no one. The schoolhouse needed a teacher, and she needed distance from her past. It was a practical arrangement, nothing more. Love had no place in her new life. 2 miles outside of town, Caleb Jennings guided his horse through the thickening snow, cursing himself for staying too long at the Jackson Ranch. At 26, he was the youngest trail boss the Rocking M had ever hired, and he took the responsibility seriously, perhaps too seriously. The cattle were safely delivered to their winter pasture, but now he might freeze before reaching town. His clean-shaven face was reddened from the cold, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. Despite the harsh conditions, there was a natural ease to how he sat in the saddle, born from years living in the saddle. Beneath his worn Stetson, hazel eyes scanned the darkening horizon with practiced vigilance. "Come on, Domino," he urged his black and white speckled horse, "just a little further." Caleb had spent 6 years drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying longer than a season. The war had taught him that attachment was dangerous, that caring too deeply meant greater pain when everything inevitably fell apart. Better to keep moving, to stay ahead of the memories and the emptiness. The frontier was no place for permanence, only survival. As Silverstone's buildings finally appeared through the swirling white, Caleb felt the familiar ache of arriving somewhere without actually coming home. There was no home, not anymore. There was only the next job, the next cattle drive, the next town. It was enough. It had to be. The blizzard hit Silverstone with unexpected fury. By nightfall, snow had piled 3 feet high against buildings, and the wind howled like a woman mourning. Grace huddled near the small stove in her room, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake coming to this wild place. The hotel creaked and groaned around her, its thin walls poor protection against Montana's wrath. A commotion in the lobby drew her attention. Curious, she wrapped her shawl tighter and ventured downstairs. The hotel owner, Mrs. Whitaker, was ushering in a snow-covered figure. "Lord have mercy, Mr. Jennings. Another hour out there, and we'd be burying you come spring." The man stomped snow from his boots, his movements stiff with cold. When he removed his hat, Grace saw a handsome face, younger than she'd expected. His hazel eyes found hers on the stairs, and something passed between them, a moment of recognition, though they'd never met. "Last room's taken, Mrs. Whitaker was saying, but you can bunk by the fire here, better than freezing to death." "I appreciate it, ma'am," he replied, his voice deep but gentle. "My horse is in your stable, hope that's all right." "Course it is. Now get those wet things off before you catch your death." Grace realized she was staring and quickly descended the rest of the stairs. "I have extra blankets in my room, Mrs. Whitaker. He's welcome to them." The older woman nodded gratefully. "This here's Miss Patterson, our new schoolteacher. Miss Patterson, meet Caleb Jennings, best trail boss this side of the Rockies." Caleb gave a slight bow. "Ma'am, sorry to bring the storm in with me." "You hardly conjured it, Mr. Jennings," Grace replied, surprised at her own teasing tone. She hurried back upstairs for the blankets, unsettled by how easily she'd spoken to this stranger when she'd vowed to keep her distance from everyone, especially men. When she returned, Caleb had shed his coat and was warming his hands by the fire. Grace couldn't help noticing how his damp shirt clung to the contours of his shoulders, or how his damp dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Here," she said, thrusting the blankets toward him. "These should help." Their fingers brushed during the exchange. She pulled back quickly, but not before feeling the calluses on his hands, working hands, honest hands. "Thank you kindly, Miss Patterson." His eyes held hers a moment too long. Grace nodded stiffly and retreated to the stairs. "Good night, Mr. Jennings, Mrs. Whittaker." Back in her room, she pressed a hand to her racing heart. It was just the excitement of the storm, she told herself. Nothing to do with hazel eyes or the way he'd said her name. The blizzard raged for 3 days, trapping everyone in town wherever they happened to be when it hit. For Grace, this meant sharing the hotel with Caleb Jennings, taking meals together in the small dining room, and finding herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. By the second day, she learned he'd fought for the Union, that he'd been riding the cattle trails since the war's end, and that he read voraciously when winter kept him idle. He spoke little of himself but listened intently when others talked, as if cataloging every word for future reference. "Why teaching?" he asked her over breakfast on the third day. "Seems a hard life, especially out here." Grace stirred her coffee, considering how much to reveal. "I enjoy children, and I wanted a fresh start." Running from something, his directness startled her. "Aren't we all?" she countered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." "What about you, Mr. Jennings? Always wanted to be a cowboy." "Caleb, please." He set down his cup. "And no, my father had a small farm in Pennsylvania. I figured I'd inherit it someday, work the same land. Then the war came. And the farm. Gone, burned during Gettysburg." His voice held no self-pity, just statement of fact. After that, wide open spaces seemed preferable to rebuilding something that would never be the same. Grace felt an unwelcome kinship with this man who understood loss. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Long time ago now." When their eyes met again, Grace felt a dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. She touched the broken chain at her neck, a reminder of promises made and broken. Of why she couldn't trust this feeling, no matter how genuine it seemed. The storm finally broke on the 4th day, leaving Silverstone buried in snow but bathed in brilliant sunshine. Caleb prepared to leave for the Rocking M Ranch, where he'd winter until spring roundup. Grace found herself lingering near the stable as he saddled Domino, telling herself she was just being neighborly by saying goodbye. "Town will miss your company, Mr. Jennings," she said, keeping her tone light. Caleb tightened Domino's cinch before turning to her. "Just the town." Grace looked away. "The schoolhouse opens next week. I'll be quite busy." "I meant what I said about helping with those bookshelves." He stepped closer. "First chance I get, I'll ride in and build them proper." "That's not necessary." "I'd like to," he interrupted. "If you'll allow it." The sincerity in his voice made her brave enough to meet his eyes again. What she saw there, warmth, respect, interest, made her heart flutter traitorously. "Very well," she conceded. "The children would appreciate proper shelves." "Just the children?" There was that hint of a smile again. "Safe travels, Mr. Jennings." Grace turned to leave, fighting the urge to look back. "Caleb," he called after her. "And I'll return soon, Miss Patterson. You have my word." Grace didn't respond, but as she walked away, she found her fingers once again tracing the broken chain around her neck. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she wondered if she'd made the right decision hiding away the heart pendant, and perhaps her own heart as well. True to his word, Caleb returned to town 3 weeks later with lumber and tools strapped to a pack horse. Grace was in the midst of lessons when a shadow darkened the schoolhouse doorway. 20 eager faces turned from their slates, and excited whispers rippled through the room at the sight of the cowboy filling the frame. "Mr. Jennings," Grace acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice even. "We're in the middle of arithmetic." "Apologies, Miss Patterson." He removed his hat. "I've come about those shelves if the timing suits." The children immediately forgot their multiplication tables, buzzing with excitement at this unexpected diversion. Grace sighed, recognizing defeat. "Class, this is Mr. Jennings. He's kindly offered to build our bookshelves." She clapped her hands once. "Now back to your problems. 7 times 8 is 56, they chorused, though most eyes remained on Caleb. He nodded respectfully and retreated outside to unload his supplies. Grace tried to refocus her students, but concentration was impossible with the rhythmic sound of sawing and hammering just outside the window. When she finally dismissed them for the day, they raced outside to watch Caleb work. Grace followed more sedately, oddly nervous about being alone with him again. She found him surrounded by children, patiently answering questions and allowing the braver ones to hold his hammer. "Does it hurt to get kicked by a cow?" 8-year-old Timothy asked. "Hurts something fierce," Caleb replied seriously. "That's why you always stay clear of the back end." "Did you ever shoot anybody?" This from Billy Watson, the blacksmith's son. Caleb's expression darkened momentarily. "That's not a proper question, son." Grace stepped forward. "Children, Mr. Jennings needs space to work. Run along home now." With reluctant goodbyes, the children dispersed, leaving Grace and Caleb in awkward silence. She noticed he'd already completed the frame for one bookshelf and had started on another. "You work quickly," she observed. Used to helping build things on the ranch, he measured a board carefully. "How are you settling in, Miss Patterson?" "Well enough. The children are eager learners, if a bit wild." Caleb chuckled. "Frontier kids, they've had to grow up fast out here." "Too fast, perhaps." She watched his hands work, strong and capable. "Have you been at the Rocking M all this time?" He nodded. "Breaking horses mostly, spring roundup still weeks away." "Yet you found time to ride into town for bookshelves." His hands paused. "I keep my promises, Miss Patterson." Something in his tone made her look up. His eyes held her steadily, and Grace felt that same dangerous warmth spreading through her again. She touched the broken chain at her neck reflexively. "What happened to your necklace?" he asked, noticing the gesture. Grace's fingers froze. "It broke during my journey west, just a small trinket." "Must have meant something. You touch it often." She hadn't realized he'd been watching her so closely. "My mother's, nothing valuable." "Value isn't always about price," he returned to his work. "My father had a pocket watch. Cheap brass thing that never kept proper time. Still, I'd give a year's wages to have it back." The simple honesty in his voice touched something in Grace she'd thought safely walled away. Before she could respond, Caleb changed the subject. "Town's organizing a spring social once the mud dries up. First one since I've been riding through these parts." Grace began straightening student papers, needing something to occupy her hands. Mrs. Whittaker mentioned it. "To welcome new settlers, I understand. Would you consider attending with me?" She looked up, startled by the directness of his request. "Mr. Jennings." Caleb, she conceded. "I don't think that would be appropriate." "As the schoolteacher." "Schoolteachers aren't allowed to dance," his lips quirked in that almost smile. "It's not that, I simply prefer to maintain a certain distance." His expression grew serious. "From me specifically, or from everyone?" The question was too perceptive, too close to truths she wasn't ready to examine. "I should prepare tomorrow's lessons," she said, retreating toward the door. "You're welcome to continue working as long as you need." Grace, it was the first time he'd used her given name, and it stopped her in her tracks. "Whatever you're running from, it can't follow you forever." She didn't turn around. "Some things don't need to follow, we carry them with us." Grace hurried inside, her hand instinctively finding the broken chain. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to trust again, to accept Caleb's invitation and whatever might follow. But the memory of Jonathan's betrayal rose sharp and clear, reminding her why she'd broken the necklace in the first place. No, the frontier was no place for romance. She had come here to be independent, not to fall into the same trap that had nearly destroyed her before. Caleb Jennings, with his quiet strength and perceptive eyes, was a complication she couldn't afford, no matter how her treacherous heart reacted to his presence. Spring came to Montana with startling swiftness. One week the town was mired in mud, the next, wildflowers dotted the surrounding prairie. The bookshelves Caleb built had transformed the schoolhouse, giving Grace's precious collection of books a proper home. Though he'd ridden out after completing them, he'd returned twice more, once bringing a repaired window latch that looked loose, another time delivering a small crate of oranges for her students, a luxury that had the children wide-eyed with wonder. Each visit left Grace more confused about her own feelings. She found herself watching the trail from town, wondering when he might appear again. It was foolish, dangerous even, yet she couldn't help herself. The spring social was scheduled for the first Saturday in May. Despite her refusal of Caleb's invitation, Grace found herself carefully pressing her best dress, a sage green cotton with delicate ivory lace at the collar and cuffs. She told herself she was attending out of obligation to the community, not hope of seeing a certain cowboy. The social was held in the newly constructed town hall, decorated with spring greenery and paper lanterns. Nearly everyone in Silverstone attended, along with ranchers and homesteaders from miles around. Grace entered alone, immediately surrounded by excited students wanting to show her off to their parents. She was deep in conversation with Mrs. Miller about her son's reading progress when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Evening, Miss Patterson." She turned to find Caleb, looking so different from his usual trail-worn self that she nearly didn't recognize him. He'd traded his work clothes for clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly visited the barber recently. "Mr. Jennings," she struggled to keep her voice even, "I didn't expect to see you here. Wouldn't miss Silverstone's big event." His eyes took in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "You look beautiful, if you don't mind my saying so." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you, you look different yourself." "Clean, you mean?" His eyes crinkled with amusement. Figured dust and cow smell wouldn't be welcome at a social. The small orchestra, 3 local men with fiddles and a guitar, began tuning up. Caleb glanced toward them, then back at Grace. "I know you declined my invitation, but now that we're both here, would you honor me with a dance?" She should refuse. She had every intention of refusing. But then he offered his hand, and Grace found herself placing her fingers in his palm before she could reconsider. "One dance," she said firmly. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "One is all I ask." He led her to the dance floor as the musicians began a waltz. Grace had learned ballroom dancing at finishing school, but she was unprepared for how it would feel to be held in Caleb's arms. His hand at her waist was respectful yet warm, his steps confident as he guided her through the turns. "You dance well for a cowboy," she observed, trying to maintain some sense of propriety despite her racing heart. "My mother insisted all her boys learn, said we'd thank her someday." His eyes held hers. She was right. As they moved around the floor, Grace became aware of approving glances from townspeople. Mrs. Whitaker was practically beaming. Even Reverend Thomas nodded approvingly as they passed. "People are watching," she murmured. "Let them," Caleb replied softly. "It's not often they see their schoolteacher dancing with the happiest man in Montana territory." The simple sincerity in his voice broke through another layer of Grace's carefully constructed defenses. For the first time since arriving in Silverstone, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that her plan for complete independence might have overlooked something essential, the basic human need for connection. One dance became 2, then 3. They paused for punch, exchanging observations about the town and its characters. Caleb told her about spring roundup preparations, while Grace shared stories about her more mischievous students. It felt strangely comfortable, as if they'd known each other far longer than a few months of occasional encounters. As the evening wore on, Caleb escorted her outside for some air. The spring night was cool but pleasant, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. "I'll be gone for a few weeks," he said as they strolled along the boardwalk. "Cattle drive to Fort Benton. Good price for beef up there this season." Grace tried to ignore the disappointment that tightened her chest. "I'm sure the rocking M appreciates your skills." "Been thinking it might be time to put down some roots." His voice was casual, but she sensed the weight behind his words. "Man can't drift forever." "What kind of roots did you have in mind?" He stopped walking, turning to face her. "That depends partly on you, Grace." Her heart stuttered, "On me? I don't understand." "I think you do." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I've never met anyone like you, smart, brave, determined. Every time I ride away from Silverstone, I find myself counting the days until I can ride back." "Caleb, I'm not asking for promises," he interrupted gently. "Just a possibility. A reason to return that's more than bookshelves or window latches." Grace's hand found the broken chain at her neck, her talisman against exactly this kind of vulnerability. She wanted to tell him everything. About Jonathan's betrayal, about the broken pendant hidden in her trunk, about her vow never to risk her heart again. Instead, she found herself revealing a different truth. "I'm afraid," she whispered. Caleb's expression softened. He reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "Fear's nothing to be ashamed of, not out here, shows good sense mostly. It's not mountain lions or blizzards that frighten me." "I know," his thumb brushed her cheekbone gently. "Whatever happened before you came here, it doesn't define who you are now or who you might become." For a breathless moment, Grace thought he might kiss her. Part of her, a growing part, hoped he would. Instead, he lowered his hand and stepped back respectfully. "I should see you home," he said. "Early start tomorrow." They walked in silence to Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house, where Grace had taken a permanent room after leaving the hotel. At the door, Caleb took her hand and bowed slightly over it, his lips just brushing her knuckles. "Until I return, Miss Patterson." Grace watched him walk away, her hands still tingling from his touch. For the first time since fleeing Pittsburgh, she wondered if her vow of isolation had been hasty, if perhaps the frontier, with all its dangers and uncertainties, might also offer unexpected healing. That night, she unlocked her trunk and retrieved the silver heart pendant with its tiny ruby center. She held it in her palm, remembering her mother's words when she'd given it to her, "Listen to your heart, Grace. It knows truth when your head is still confused." She closed her fingers around the pendant, no longer certain the broken necklace had protected her as she'd intended. Perhaps instead it had simply left her incomplete. Caleb's absence stretched from the expected few weeks into nearly 2 months. Spring turned to early summer, and still no word came from the trail boss. Grace tried to focus on her teaching, on the everyday rhythms of Silverstone, but found herself watching the horizon whenever she ventured outside. "No need to fret, dear," Mrs. Whittaker assured her over breakfast one morning. "Trail driving's unpredictable business, weather, river crossings, all manner of delays." "I'm not fretting," Grace insisted, though her untouched breakfast suggested otherwise. "Mr. Jennings's whereabouts are hardly my concern." The older woman's knowing smile said she believed otherwise, but she kindly changed the subject. In late June, trouble arrived in Silverstone. 3 rough-looking men rode into town, taking rooms at the hotel and spending freely at the saloon. Their questions about local ranches and shipping routes raised suspicions, but it was their particular interest in the school schedule that alarmed Grace. "Said they were curious about education opportunities," Sheriff Taylor explained when he visited the schoolhouse to warn her. "But something don't sit right. Keep your door locked, Miss Patterson, especially after hours." Grace nodded, grateful for the warning but determined not to show fear. "Do you know who they are?" "Not officially," the sheriff adjusted his gun belt uncomfortably, "but one matches the description of Wade Harmon. He's wanted in Wyoming for cattle rustling and worse." After the sheriff left, Grace found herself reaching for the pendant she now kept in her pocket rather than hiding it away. She'd taken to carrying it with her, a reminder of the possibility Caleb had asked her to consider before he left. Now, with this new threat in town, she wondered if she'd missed her chance to tell him the truth about the necklace and about her growing feelings for him. 2 days later, Grace was organizing the schoolhouse after dismissing her students when the door opened without warning. 3 men entered, the strangers everyone had been whispering about. Their leader, a tall man with a face pitted from smallpox scars, removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Afternoon, teacher lady. Hope we ain't disturbing your scholarly activities." Grace set down her books, keeping the large oak desk between them. "The school day is over, gentlemen. If you have children to enroll, you can return tomorrow morning." The man laughed an unpleasant sound. "No children, ma'am. We're just getting acquainted with local establishments." His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the fine bookshelves Caleb had built. "Pretty place, shame if anything happened to it." The threat was unmistakable. Grace straightened her spine, refusing to show fear. "Sheriff Taylor mentioned you were in town. I believe he was quite interested in making your acquaintance." "Oh, we've met the sheriff." The man stepped closer. "Seems he's riding out to the Collins place. Emergency with their boy, won't be back till morning." Ice formed in Grace's stomach. They'd waited until the sheriff was gone. She glanced toward the window, wondering if she could reach it before they stopped her. "Now, don't go getting ideas," the man said, following her gaze. "We just want information. Word is, you're friendly with a rocking M-Rider." Caleb Jennings. Grace's heart leapt at Caleb's name, then plummeted at the realization these men were somehow connected to him. "I know many people in town." "Don't play coy, Miss Patterson." He spat her name like it tasted bad. "Jennings took something that don't belong to him. We mean to get it back." "I don't know what you're talking about. Mr. Jennings isn't even in Silverstone. He's been gone for weeks." "Yeah, that's the problem," the second man spoke up, his voice raspy. "Boss expected those cattle in Wyoming. Instead, Jennings took 'em to Fort Benton, stole our profit." Understanding dawned. These were rustlers, and they believed Caleb had somehow interfered with their operation. The irony might have made her laugh if she weren't so terrified. "I can't help you," she said firmly, "and I suggest you leave before someone comes looking for me." The scarred man's pretense at politeness vanished. "Nobody's coming, teacher. And you're gonna help us by delivering a message." He nodded to his companions, who moved toward her with purpose. "Jennings needs to understand what happens when he crosses Wade Harmon." Grace backed away until she hit the wall. Her hand closed around the silver heart pendant in her pocket as she searched desperately for escape. The men advanced, their intentions clear in their cold eyes. Just then, the schoolhouse door burst open. Caleb stood framed in the doorway, dust-covered and travel-worn, but wonderfully, gloriously present. His revolver was already drawn, aimed at Harmon's chest. "Step away from her," he ordered, his voice like steel. "No." Harmon's hand moved toward his own gun, but Caleb cocked his revolver. "3 against 1's poor odds, Harmon, but I'll take at least 2 of you with me, your choice." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Harmon slowly raised his hands. "Just having a friendly chat with the schoolmarm, Jennings, no need for bloodshed." "Nothing friendly about cornering a lady." Caleb's eyes flicked to Grace. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion closing her throat. "Good, now you 3 are gonna back out nice and slow. My men are outside, and they're mighty interested in having a word with known rustlers." It was a bluff. Grace could see no evidence of others outside, but Harmon couldn't know that. He gestured to his companions, and they edged toward the door. "This isn't over, Jennings," Harmon growled. "That army paymaster's gold wasn't yours to steal," Caleb finished. "And those cattle you rebranded weren't yours either. Fort Benton's marshal was mighty interested in that information." Understanding flashed across Harmon's face. "You set us up." "The army did that. I just made sure their trap worked." Caleb gestured with his gun. "Outside now." Once the men were out the door, Caleb whistled sharply. To Grace's astonishment, riders appeared from both sides of the schoolhouse, rocking Cowboys, armed and ready. They quickly disarmed and bound the rustlers. "Perfect timing, boss," one called to Caleb. "Sheriff's deputies waiting at the jail." "Take them over," Caleb ordered. "I'll be along directly." When they were alone, Caleb holstered his weapon and crossed to Grace in 3 long strides. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" She shook her head, still processing his miraculous appearance. "How did you know? How are you even here?" "Got word Harmon's gang was headed this way. Been tracking them for weeks." His hands hovered near her shoulders, not quite touching her. "When I realized they might come after you to get to me." The fear and worry in his eyes undid her completely. Grace closed the distance between them, pressing herself against his chest as tears of relief finally broke free. Caleb's arms came around her instantly, strong and protective. "I thought I'd be too late," he murmured into her hair. "Grace, if anything had happened to you because of me." "But it didn't." She pulled back enough to see his face. "You came, that's what matters." His expression was agonized. "I put you in danger. These past weeks, working with the army to catch Harmon's gang, I never thought they'd connect you to me." "Why would they?" She searched his face, confused. "Because everyone in 3 territories knows how I feel about you." His voice dropped. "Harmon figured you were my weakness. He wasn't wrong." Grace's heart thundered in her chest. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the silver heart pendant. "I need to show you something." Caleb looked down at the pendant, then at the broken chain she still wore around her neck. Understanding dawned in his eyes, the missing piece. I broke it deliberately. Before I came west, the words tumbled out, unstoppable now. My fiancé in Pittsburgh, I discovered he only wanted my family's money. When I confronted him, he wasn't the man I thought he was. Caleb's jaw tightened. Did he hurt you? Not physically, but I trusted him completely. When that trust shattered, she closed her fingers around the heart pendant. I broke the necklace as a reminder never to be so foolish again. I told myself the frontier was no place for romance, that I needed to be completely independent. And now, his question was barely audible. Grace looked up at this man who had ridden for days to protect her, who had built bookshelves for her students and brought oranges just to see them smile. This man whose absence had left her watching the horizon, whose presence made her feel both safer and more alive than she'd ever felt before. Now I think perhaps I was wrong, she whispered, about the frontier, about myself. About what I truly need. Caleb's hand covered hers, both of them holding the silver heart. Grace Patterson, from the moment I saw you on those stairs at Mrs. Whittaker's, something in me recognized something in you. Like finding a piece of home I didn't know was missing. His words resonated so deeply that Grace felt tears threatening again. I've been so afraid of making another mistake. I can't promise we won't face hardships, he said seriously. Out here that's just life, but I can promise you won't face them alone, not if you'll have me. Instead of answering with words, Grace pressed the silver heart into his palm, then turned and lifted her hair, exposing the broken chain around her neck. Would you help me make it whole again? Caleb's fingers trembled slightly as he carefully connected the pendant to the chain. When he'd secured it, his hands lingered at her nape, a gentle caress that sent warmth cascading through her. Grace turned back to face him, the complete necklace once more resting over her heart. Better, he asked, almost. She reached up, threading her fingers through his hair and drew his face down to hers. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and answer all at once. When they parted, Caleb's eyes were filled with wonder and something deeper, more enduring. I love you, Grace Patterson, he said simply, have since that first blizzard. Well, till my last day. I love you too, she replied, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right, though I tried very hard not to. His smile was brilliant. Stubborn woman. You have no idea, she laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Outside, the Montana summer evening stretched golden across the prairie. There would be explanations needed about the rustlers, about Caleb's work with the army, about their sudden courtship. But those could wait. For now, it was enough to stand in the schoolhouse Caleb had helped make beautiful, wearing a mended necklace that symbolized her own healing heart, and know with absolute certainty that she had found not just love, but home. By autumn, the story of how Caleb Jennings had helped capture the notorious Harmon gang was the stuff of local legend. What fewer people knew was how he had purchased land just outside Silverstone, or how carefully he and Grace had planned the small but comfortable home now taking shape on that property. Their wedding took place on the first Saturday in October, with the entire town in attendance. Grace wore her mother's silver heart necklace against her ivory wedding dress, the ruby catching the light as she and Caleb spoke their vows in Silverstone's small church. I was so convinced the frontier was no place for love, Grace mused that evening as they stood on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. That I needed to stand alone to be strong. Caleb's arms encircled her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, and now. She turned in his embrace, looping her arms around his neck. The silver heart pendant rested between them, whole and unbroken. Now I know that true strength isn't about standing alone, it's about finding someone worth standing beside, no matter what comes. And true love, his eyes held that mixture of strength and gentleness that had first captured her heart. Grace smiled, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. True love is finding the missing piece you didn't even know you were looking for. As the last light faded from the Montana sky, Caleb and Grace Jennings stood together on the threshold of their new life, no longer lonely drifters but partners facing the frontier's challenges and joys as one. The broken necklace had led her not to isolation but to wholeness, not to independence but to the most freeing kind of connection. In Caleb's arms, with the vast prairie stretching around their home, Grace had finally found the belonging she'd been searching for all along.